the last panel of this of today. We have 5 panelists. First, we have Ms. Rahman Kasule, who is an entrepreneur. She's the founder of the Century Entrepreneurship Development Agency. She's a Uganda national, and she's won several awards in this regard. She's trained over 186,000 youth and women in Africa on entrepreneurship. Ms. Kasule, you are welcome. Then we have John B., who is the regional head of Nestle. In terms of the research and development of Nestle, he's based in Abidjan. You're welcome. We have Jean-Louis Ntang, who is the founder of UX Media Lab, based in Cameroon. He was based in the United States, but out of his commitment and patriotism to this continent, he has since moved to Cameroon recently. We'll ask him about his experience relocating back home from the United States. He's an ICT expert and is impacting that knowledge on young people in Cameroon currently. We have Ms. Mujuba Olufunke Okome, who is a professor of political science and African and Women's Studies at Brooklyn College in the United States. Professor Okome, you're welcome. And we have Ms. Priya Luka, who is the head of strategy, Christian Aid, and visiting fellow, Goldsmith University in London. You are welcome, Priya. Our methodology, we have 1 hour. I've been having running battle with those who are keeping the time. They've insisted I have to do 45 minutes, but I've told them no, I'm going to do 1 hour. I'll be very strict with time. I've also noticed that so far we've not allowed the audience to interact. And in this session, be rest assured you are going to interact with the panel. It wouldn't be a monologue, it will be a dialogue. Because what we've been having so far, to me, it's a monologue. The panelists have been talking, nobody has been reacting. So we are going to manage our time very well. We're going to have 25 minutes. I'm going to give them the leeway to speak to the key areas. Then we'll come back to you, the participants, to ask questions, raise issues. Then we'll come back to them. So in that 1 hour, we'll be able to get everything right and everything correct in the time frame. There are 5 questions or 6 that we'll be looking at, of 5 or 6 issues. And I'm going to give my panelists the leeway to be able to speak to those issues the way they want it, given their experience, their perspectives in terms of what they've been doing. First is, how can the private sector support the process of job creation and employability for young people? How can the private sector support it? How can the private sector support innovation and creativity? Because innovation and creativity, they are very key in the brave new modern world that we are in. If you're not innovative, you're not creative, you cannot survive. How can the private sector support training, mentorship, and apprenticeship, which is extremely important? How can the private sector deploy ICT to support young entrepreneurs? How can the private sector deploy ICT to support young entrepreneurs? And how can the micro, small, and medium-scale enterprises have an interlinkage with the big companies, creating interlinkages between with the big companies so that they will be able to they will be able to grow and stabilize and be able to be part of the development of the economy. So I'm going to give my panelists the leeway to give us their experiences in terms of what they're doing and then their perspectives in these areas unencumbered, and for them to share their experiences with us. I'll start with Ms. Kasule to tell us her story. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. You know, growing up, I have a deep voice, so growing up, girls used to tease me. They used to call me boy, so if you hear me loud, that's the voice I use. So for me, I'll start from my story. I was born a village girl, but I refused to become a village woman. And growing up in a Muslim Chiganda family, girls never spoke much because we are not allowed to speak. you don't speak. But for me, from a young age, I realized I can't be grounded by the gender norms and the cultural societies and what they tell us. And so at 26 years, I started my own business right after university. Even that, I had so many dream takers, people who told me, how do you start a business when everyone is getting a job? I never worked in an air-conditioned office, because when you start out as a young entrepreneur, you don't have that kind of money. But for me, that's where it stemmed who I am and what I am today. It's the belief and the hope to know that not everyone will walk the same journey. And I've done that for 10 years. After running a branding and marketing firm for 10 years, I shifted from building brands to shifting mindsets by starting a nonprofit organization called CEDA International. We work with girls' education, workforce development, and women's leadership. And over the years, one of the things I've seen and realized working with private sector is the fact that private sector is just a consumer of labor. They don't actually invest in development of the labor force. That's number one. The second issue that I've seen and what we are working on is when you talk about investments in Africa, private sector and everyone, the governments, we have what we call mindset renewal, because everyone is thinking about short-termism. I remember one private sector asked me, if we invest in young people and they leave my job, where will the investment go? And I asked him back, what if they stay at your job and they are not productive? So today, when we are speaking about youth employment, let's not speak about, the challenges are so many, but I just want to map out three of the, depending on the experience that I've got. One is human trafficking, which is an issue now. A lot of young people are being trafficked in the Arab world. Secondly is violent extremism and radicalization. The third one, which is so important but people don't realize a lot, is mental illness and depression among young people, especially the educated one. Once they have jobs, but the jobs don't pay them enough, they go into depression. So what I'm doing about it, right now I'm at Harvard University doing a fellowship, and my project is focused on youth creation in Africa. So it's called Plus Africa, and we are looking at 5 main things. It's about inspiring young people, mentoring them, linking them to private sector for mentorship and job creation, and lastly, engaging young people to have a voice. Because we know with a voice, it's also about changing the narrative from young people being called the leaders of tomorrow to being leaders of today. And once we change that, we realize that we are doing much more. And lastly, for me, which is important, and one of the things we must do, is to document our stories. Document stories. Because young people will be only inspired by our own stories, not stories of white men and what they did. We need to document our stories. I remember 2009, when I documented my story. This is a book I wrote, From Gomba to the White House. Gomba is the small village where I was born. When I was invited by President Obama in recognition of my work, I wrote this book. And I remember a gentleman came to me and said, "You're so young, what are you writing about?" But today, this book has empowered other young people to realize that they too can dream. They too can have a voice. Whether you're a woman, a girl, a Muslim, a Christian, it's not about your background. You have the power to design the future you want. So as I end, really it's about, we can't just talk about innovation and pick something that has worked somewhere else and bring it to Africa. We need to create Africa's solutions for Africa's problems, because it's not about colonization. We can talk about white man's supremacy, that word, but unless we have our own solutions, which are homegrown, and we engage our young people, that's the only way we are going to move the needle.
Thank you very much. She was right on time. 5 minutes. I think the key message from this, which I heard you say very clearly, I was born a village girl, but I refuse to be a village woman. That's, I think, is a very powerful message, and is a product of your own motivation, your own determination, and which you've become a role model to young girls. I think that was fantastic. I'll call on Jean Louis to give us his own experience from the ICT perspective.
Of course. So, in 2009, a brief background. I did most of my career in advertising and marketing. At the age of 9, I saw a commercial that changed my life, and then I decided that that's what I wanted to do. And the reason being is because when I teach the kids at university, I give them this definition of advertising. I say, advertising is the one and only field in the world that can shape religion, politics, and fashion at the same time. You know, the biggest marketing event in history is actually dating I think 459 BC. It was, 459 AD, right? Nero, the emperor, was against Christianity, right? And so he was burning the city, the churches in the city. And then one time, the whole city caught fire. I'm sure pretty much everybody knows the story of Rome catching fire. But then everything in the city burned except the church. Do you know what that meant for Christianity in the world? Everybody that survived the fire and saw the church standing there converted to Christianity. That was the first, I'm sorry to say it as a Christian, but that was the first marketing operation right there. So understanding how powerful marketing and advertising was, I decided that this is the field I want to be in so that I can change the minds of people, that I can make a difference in my community. So back in 2009, I made a conscious decision that in 10 years' time, I would move back to Cameroon, and I would start a company that would help engineer the African narrative by working on the Cameroonian brand as we know it, or as we will know it in the next few years, but also help enhance the stories of other brands across the continent and facilitate the transition between brands moving into the continent that are willing to talk to the African people in their context. Because a lot of times, commercials are made abroad and they're just fed to people in Africa without context. So I'm here to try to help with that. In that process, several things happened. I started my first business back in 2011. And it was a consulting agency. And I realized that a lot of the education that the students were receiving in advertising did not match what the workforce was looking for. So I collaborated with the Advanced School of Mass Communication and totally redesigned the advertising program to make it more efficient and effective so that when the students would come out of school, they would not require training. They would just be able to be workers right away. And earlier this morning, somebody mentioned that a lot of companies are wasting money on training. And this is happening because our curriculum do not match what the demand is. So to tie it back with ICT, when I did my doctorate, I really wanted something that could be actionable and that could be duplicated across different African countries. So I decided to tackle the problem of health. We had a discussion a few nights ago, I think last night, where I shared with my colleagues here that roughly 60% of the world disease burden is in Africa. Yet, most of the health workers are in the West, right? In the case of Cameroon, for one doctor, you have 3,000 patients. In the West, for one doctor, you have 24 patients. So because of that, there's a lot of malpractice, there's a lot of clinical errors, and diseases like malaria and other smaller diseases that are supposed to be benign are causing death across the continent because people don't have real-time information. So for my dissertation, I decided to use a tool that everybody has, which is WhatsApp, right? converted WhatsApp into a content management system for hospitals. Because most hospitals can afford computers, they can afford an internet connections, and yet their personnel they all have smartphones. So I realized if everybody has a smartphone already, then we can tailor the solution that everybody is already using just to communicate with each other and turn it into a tool that can help them evaluate and have a real-time conversation with their colleagues in the country or outside the barriers of the country so that they can have real-time information and make clinical decisions that can save lives. I did this 2 years ago. We are rolling out in several hospitals in 2020. And this is just to show that sometimes we have the tools as Africans when it comes to ICT. We don't necessarily create the tools, but we find innovative ways to use those tools to solve problems that we are facing. And I think most of these solutions come from young people because they're the ones who are, especially in my generation, we are old enough that we know what a rotary phone is, yet we're young enough to know what WhatsApp is. So we are in the middle and we are in the right position to help join both generations, the ones that are younger and the ones that are older, to usher a new era of innovation, creativity, and use of technology to solve our current issues.
Thank you very much. We will now take an academic perspective to it. I would invite Mojuba Olufunke Okome to make her intervention.
Well, good evening. I grew up in a mega city in Lagos, Nigeria, but I'm not from there. My mother always told me, "You're not from here, we're from up country." So I always wanted to be a writer, but I wanted to write novels. It's funny because I don't think I would write interesting novels, at least I'm not capable. I've done a lot of writing though. But I also always wanted to do a PhD and become a professor, and that's what I ended up doing. But my journey to get there, it took me 14 years after my master's to get a PhD because I had 2 children. But that was transformative for me because I was forced to slow down. I chose to take care of my children because I'm an African in the US, and I've been in the US now for 38 years. So having to slow down and get on the mommy track also opened my eyes. First of all, I became more humble. I became more compassionate, more empathetic. And my PhD experience was very brutal. So it made me interested in helping other people to navigate and, do things faster than I did. Also, because I was slowed down in that respect, I actually kind of speeded up with my career, and I got my promotions very rapidly because I was working incessantly. So I decided also to use my experience to mentor others. And so I have a lot of mentees informally. Formally, I also do mentorship of predominantly women because they have a harder time in academia, both as PhD, even, master's students. Once a woman has a child and a family, and, for many of my students, they also work, that creates more complications for you. And a lot of times you need somebody that can just say a sympathetic word that can encourage you. So I do that for people. Plus also advice in terms of how to publish for junior colleagues who are professors. So I do that in the US. I do it intensively in Nigeria. Because although I've left Nigeria, and I live in the US, I have never left. I've always gone back. My children are as much Nigerian as they are Americans. So I believe that the only way that we can live the world a better place than we find it, is to take an interest in people, to use our skills, to open up doors for people who don't have opportunities, to advocate. So I do advocacy as well. And one of the things I'm advocating on right now is bring back our girls, because we had Boko Haram abduct young women in 2014 from this high school in Chibok, Borno State. And there have been many other abductions of women and girls and even boys and men that people don't know their names. So I'm doing advocacy for that. I am also working on increasing the percentage of women in politics in Nigeria, and this is something I'm doing with women politicians and women's NGOs in Nigeria. And I do believe that we will get to the 30%, and I want parity in that respect. So I teach political science. International relations is my area of specialization. I chose to study Nigeria's political economy because that's where my deep interest is, to kind of try to find answers to some of our problems. So I believe that each of us has something to give, and it is our duty, if you have, to whom much is given, much is required. So taking an interest, making sure that one helps to develop the next generation, not just as a job, but in terms of making people know that you are there for them, you have their back, you mentor them, you open doors for them, you write letters at inconvenient times. Sometimes my students would come, or junior colleagues, and it's one day to the deadline. So always be ready to give back, because when we touch other people, as long as you touch one person, that person can do something for somebody else, and this grows. And then formally, I'm also doing mentorship for institutions, including Codesri. I just started doing mentorship for them to mentor PhD students. So I think that each of us, whatever you can do to build up another human being, that is actually invaluable, and it also enriches you as a person. So.
Thank you very much. I think she's really underscored the Ubuntu philosophy. We are who we are because of others around us. I think that's extremely important. Priya Luka, you have the floor.
Thank you, everyone. So I'm here to talk about some research that I've been doing on green and decent jobs. So I think this morning we've heard a lot about the starting place on job creation typically being manufacturing. That creates a know-how and a technical capability that can help a country reach an export frontier. But the current reality is that manufacturing employment absorption or creation for young people is really low, and it's too low to actually be relied on. So that's the starting point for some of the research that I've been doing. And I think where I was really coming at the kind of green and decent jobs and why the focus on decent and green was that we really need to structurally rethink what making economies work for all people means, especially the most marginalized who are facing underemployment, informality, and working poverty as long-term phenomena for them. So in these contexts and across many African countries, what we're seeing is the evidence of agriculture still being a source of livelihoods in many settings. So I think today my representation to all of us, when we think about what leveraging private sector interest and experience and expertise in job creation is, firstly this: not to see livelihoods and environmental needs as two separate and competing priorities. So I think we need to push back on the idea that any job will do, first of all. And that really comes from my belief that climate change affects those countries without the resilience mechanisms to cope in more magnitude. So many of those are African countries, as we've seen with Cyclone Idai this year and its devastating effects. So the time to look at the jobs crisis or the jobs challenge and climate change as separate phenomena is gone. We need to tackle both in the same way, in the same strategizing. So that means bringing together policymakers, practitioners, funders, philanthropists together in the same setting to kind of tackle these twin challenges and look at the opportunities in both together. So I've been trying to work out how the international development community can respond to the jobs challenge, and I've spent the last couple of years researching local, community-led, often women-led green and decent jobs creation projects. So this has involved discussions with many different projects across the world, mainly in South Asia and Africa, and discussions with the ILO, the International Trade Union community, and WIEGO. And amongst all of us, there's an agreement, firstly, that those, when we begin to look at the jobs issue, we need to be transformational. Those jobs need to be transformational, and they need to target the most marginalized groups. So this work's now been turned into an ILO paper, and I just wanted to touch on a couple of the examples that we've been researching. So first of all, there's the Community Works Programme in South Africa. It's a government programme that's set up to create employment based on communities actually defining specific needs in their localities. So for example, repairing community assets. And I really wanted to draw attention to the impact that this program's had on women. So for example, one of the services that they created was home-based care services, which if we look at the impact of that can actually unlock productive capacity for women, so has so many indirect effects as well as employment creation. Another project that I wanted to touch on was the Zambian Green Jobs Project, which was a partnership between the Zambian government and the ILO, and it actually helped female smallholder farmers in the Kalakushi Copperbelt province to have training and loans to build their own homes with green technologies. So once they built their own homes, they were able to spread this service further and offer home building with actual green concerns built into the design. And it brought together the concrete and construction sectors, it brought together vocational and educational programs and loaning functions. So these are some of the examples and of the kind of research that I've been gathering over the last couple of years, and I've got a few copies of my paper if anyone's interested. But I know what policymakers must be thinking. So this is great, these are local projects, but what about the employment effects? What scale is it? What's the productivity? What's the replicability? And these are all really valid concerns, really valid issues. And what I'd say is, the research that I've done has shown that these projects at a local level have potential. They can be replicated across different communities in different contexts. They're probably not large-scale employment examples yet, but they deserve consideration and further investigation, and the initial evidence is good. The initial evidence shows that you can create jobs that are decent, so meet the ILO conditions and under the ILO's 4 pillars for what decent work is, and green, so that when I say green, I mean they restore ecology or they repair damage caused, and they target climate change in effect. But what I've also found from my research is that decent and green don't happen automatically. They need to be specifically planned for, but when they are, huge gains can be realized. And I think that they represent for me multi-layered transformational strategies, as I've highlighted in South Africa and Zambia, and they can really lead to changes in social structures and relations as well. And I think unless we tackle that as people, as an international community that's assembled here, who's really concerned about job creation, we don't really know if the job creation effect is really unlocking people who are stuck in disadvantage, and if we're really tackling the way in which their agency needs to be released in the opportunities that are being created. So I think for me, what I'd say, kind of wrapping up, is that it's about different actors coming together, firms, governments, loaning agencies, funders, philanthropists. And I think this morning, some of the things that I heard about the whole ecosystem and the kind of holistic approach really resonated for me. So this is what the green and decent kind of challenge rests in. And yeah, I think we should not think that just any job will do and that we can create jobs and then think about the climate effects afterwards. I think that we owe it to be innovative in the challenges ahead and not deprioritize climate change and think about jobs in a more industrial way now and think that we can clear up the effects afterwards. We really should tackle both challenges in a multi-sectored and multi-strategized way now.
Thank you very much. I think the point is well made about partnership, about collaboration, and about different stakeholders coming together to support small businesses and young entrepreneurs. I'll move to the last panelist, John B., who works for Nestle. He will give us the perspective of big business, the multinationals. What is it that they are doing to support, to create jobs and support young entrepreneurs in Africa? You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the organisers for inviting us to share some perspectives today. Just a little bit about us, for those of us who don't know us so well in Africa. We're 24 factories, 14 countries, 14,500 direct employees. About 75,000 people earn their living directly from us, and we interact with about 110,000 farmers up and down our supply chain in one level or another. I'm based at our African R&D Centre in Abidjan. We also have a quality assessment lab. I'd like to respond a little bit to what Priya was just saying there. We've launched earlier this year an innovation accelerator where we're mentoring and bringing on startups, but also university innovators, because innovation happens inside universities. It doesn't just happen, within the startups in the private sector. So just today at Gaston Berger University in Senegal, we presented a funding for a startup idea on sustainable packaging innovation. Now, this is, we are faced with certain sustainability and other, challenges that we don't have, with all our research capacity, we don't have all the answers to. So this is why we wanted to open this out to, a broader ecosystem of young innovators primarily. So that's one of the first things we're doing, but, our engagement is fairly holistic. In addition to the initiatives like that one, we are accompanying PhD students and MScs in our research centre, but we go all the way up and down the sort of income spectrum as well. For example, we are working with young agripreneurs in our coffee, cocoa and grain supply chains. It's often said that the average age of a coffee or cocoa farmer in most parts of Africa is around 60, that people, I think we've heard it before, that people aren't coming into agriculture as a business of opportunity for young people. We want to change that. And we're working with a range of stakeholders to invest in the the Alliance of Green Revolution in Africa. For example, we're working with them to make farming of grains and legumes and cassava in West Africa a profitable business, and to build the ecosystem around those farms so that you've got mechanization supply, input supply, finance supply, telecom supply, all of those actors coming together to build a more attractive agricultural ecosystem. In addition to that, we have 4,000 mainly young people who we supply material, training, often basic literacy, numeracy and business skills to, who are our market sellers. So they are selling our Nescafe in ready to drink, or they're selling our Maggie cubes in markets. We have a partnership with the MTN Foundation in Côte d'Ivoire, where I'm based, which is again addressing those gaps of numeracy, literacy, basic business skills, so that those jobs can be decent jobs. Okay, so that's those are some of the areas that we're acting in. Here in we have a TVET centre in Côte d'Ivoire that we've invested about $900,000 into to train young electrical and mechanical engineers. Why do we do that? Because we want to, get good press? No, absolutely not, because we need young, skilled engineers, electricians, electronics experts to run our machinery. If we don't invest in that, we're not going to get those young people. So it's in our best interest to do that. We want to have those training systems accredited to international standards. We haven't found the business case to make that happen yet. So we're looking for funding to make those training schemes accredited. Here in Egypt, we supported the TVET scheme that the Minister referred to earlier. And then just as a final word, we know that we can't do this by ourselves. And actually, we've seen in other parts of the world real power come together when we mobilize our peers up and down our supply chain. So we launched something called All for Youth in Africa, which is an African edition of something that we first started in Europe, moved to Latin America, whereby we're bringing together companies like Société Générale, like MTN, like Siemens in certain countries. So it's focused on Angola and Cote d'Ivoire right now, but there's opportunity to move that elsewhere. This is going to focus initially on employability skills, because what we find as well is that when interviewees come to us, they often don't have the basic CV skills, they don't have the basic interview skills, they're not schooled in how to present themselves, and none of this exists in the majority of the formal education systems in many of our African countries. By the way, it doesn't mainly in Europe or North America either. So this is a practical support that we and our partners who have specific needs for employing young people can bring to the table to prepare those young people for the world of work. We're going to target 500 young people in Angola next year, 5,000 in Cote d'Ivoire, and all the subsequent years thereafter, another 10,000 a year in Cote d'Ivoire. We'll see how that goes with the rest of the countries. It's a little bit suck it and see. We don't know what we're going to get out of this. We have seen that it translates into real jobs in the other parts of the world where we've done it. We'll kind of have to see how that goes, and I'm going to stop there.
Thank you very much. John, can we give him a round of applause, please? We've listened to the panelists. We've used 30 minutes. I'm closely watching the time. We'll return to you, the participants, to ask questions, raise issues, make comments, and probably grill the panelists. Please feel free to grill them. And I will start, with John, and I will invite you to do the same. There has been issues around, we've listened to what your company is doing, but there has been issues around child labor in cocoa plantation. And we'll come back to you to speak to that. And the thinking is that many of the big companies producing chocolates are culpable in that particular issue. So we'll come back to you. Don't say anything yet. You have the floor, the audience. Please raise up your hand, identify yourself, and ask your question or make your comment. Yes.
Can we make sure we have a mic for the floor as well? Because I don't know if...
Yes. Can we have the mic on the floor? We are going to have 3 more minutes to our time, since they are taking time to bring the mic.
Oh.
Yes, the man in African attire, yeah, youth.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Je me nomme Jules Lionel Tadon, je viens du Cameroun, du ministère de l'économie, de la planification et de l'aménagement du territoire. Alors, en écoutant les panélistes, on a bien envie de rêver en tant que jeune. Mais en réalité, leur histoire montre tout de même qu'ils ne sont pas partis de zéro. Ils ont eu d'une manière ou d'une autre des impulsions. En fait, quelque part, avec des gens qui viennent des États-Unis pour investir, je me dis quelque part, il y a quand même un capital, un minimum. Que ferons-nous de nos jeunes qui, véritablement, pour lever les différentes barrières, notamment financières, parce que déjà, ils n'ont pas les moyens pour avoir accès à l'éducation dont ils ont besoin. Comment faire aussi pour lever certaines barrières sur le plan politique, c'est-à-dire parfois on a bien envie de se lancer dans un business, mais parfois les taxes, les impôts ne nous permettent véritablement pas et même l'environnement des affaires. Parce que là, ma question s'adresse aussi beaucoup plus aussi à Jean-Louis, de nous dire comment est-ce qu'il fait pour s'en sortir au Cameroun, connaissant le contexte. Donc je vais m'arrêter là pour ne pas tirer de long en large.
Okay.
Sophie, let's take a couple of questions, then we'll come back to the panelists.
Okay.
Just note the question.
Okay.
Yes.
Merci. Je m'appelle Sid Mohamed, je suis du Conseil national de la jeunesse du Niger. Alors j'ai deux questions. La première question, c'est surtout au secteur privé de façon générale. Pour engager un jeune, on demande ou on exige une expérience souvent de 5 ans, 10 ans ou plus. Alors comment faciliter l'accès à l'emploi des jeunes qui sont diplômés, qui n'ont pas assez d'expérience? Ça, c'est la première question. La deuxième question, c'est... je l'adresse à Kassul, qui disait qu'elle était née dans un village, mais qui n'a pas décidé de rester villageoise. Alors comment vous, étant donné que vous n'êtes plus villageoise, comment vous avez pu amener les autres femmes qui sont nées au village à ne pas être ou à ne pas rester villageoises? C'est ce que je voulais savoir.
Let's move to the ladies. Lady on the black, then.
Hello, my name is Salimata Musali, and I currently work for a fair trade NGO. And my question will be for Mr. John B, because you already touched upon the child labor issue in cocoa farming, and also he mentioned that most farmers in cocoa are old. So I wanted to check, what is Nestle's perspective on including youth into that cocoa supply chain? And also, have they invested in organizing that supply chain to make sure that that type of agriculture is attractive to youth? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
I have two questions. My name is Margaret Colley. I work at the United Nations University. My first question goes to you, Professor Okome. In your experience, how does higher education at the PhD level, for example, translate into employment or addressing this issue? Because we're very interested in the question of transforming research into practice. So in your experience, what's the relevance of that higher education in creating jobs? And my second question goes to you, Madame Kasule. Thank you very much for sharing your book with us today, and congratulations. This morning we learned that on average, the average age for a successful entrepreneur is 45 years old. But is that the same for women? I can imagine there is a different set of challenges there, especially for women entrepreneurs in Africa. And if you could share with us a little bit of your journey and your story based on your book, we'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm sure some of those things we'll have to do, bilaterally. Yes, the lady in white, yes.
Bonsoir. Pour moi, ce n'est pas une question, c'est un apport. Donc, je ne sais pas si j'attends ou bien maintenant que j'apporte une contribution.
So it's a contribution, not a question.
Anyone you are comfortable with in 1 minute.
OK. Moi, je suis Mademoiselle Kone Mafirma, je viens de la Côte d'Ivoire, je suis agriculteur et aviculteur. Donc, je fais l'élevage des volailles, des dindes blanches, des chais. Je voulais dire que ce n'est pas facile l'entrepreneuriat parce que nous, surtout dans nos pays francophones, nous n'avons pas cette culture de l'entrepreneuriat. On ne nous apprend pas, il n'y a pas une école où on apprend ça. Dans nos systèmes éducatifs, il n'y en a pas. Et maintenant que le taux de chômage est élevé, nous attendons l'entrepreneuriat qu'on entreprenne, mais on n'a pas de guide, on n'a pas de mentor. Et nous qui avons le courage, nous commençons. Lorsque nous commençons, nous sommes confrontés à des problèmes qu'on n'a pas de questions, on n'a pas de réponses. Donc, ce que je préconise, c'est qu'on puisse nous mentorer, ou bien même faire des plaidoyers pour inclure l'entrepreneuriat dans le système éducatif, surtout à la base. Quand je dis la base, soit au primaire ou bien au secondaire. À mon niveau, dans ma ferme, j'emploie que des femmes parce que j'ai une organisation de réseau de jeunes femmes. Je vois que les femmes s'intéressent pas trop à ce milieu. Et aussi la frange qui n'est pas inclue dans les prises en charge, il y a les déscolarisés, les jeunes filles qui ne sont pas allées à l'école du tout, ou celles qui ont arrêté l'école en cours de chemin. Donc, dans ma ferme, j'emploie les jeunes filles, je les encourage à s'installer à leur propre compte. Et il y a certaines aussi qui veulent faire le commerce dehors. Souvent, on leur donne et elles vendent, elles prennent le bénéfice et au fur et à mesure, elles ont leur capital. Mais c'est une goutte d'eau dans la mer. Vraiment, nous voulons beaucoup plus accroître ces genres d'activités pour que les jeunes puissent s'intéresser à ce domaine-là. Mais j'insiste beaucoup sur le mentorat. Il faut que ceux qui ont réussi, ils partagent leurs expériences, les difficultés qu'ils ont eues, parce que quand on les voit, on pense que tout va bien. Et il faut qu'ils partagent les expériences pour préparer psychologiquement les jeunes à tous ces problèmes qu'ils pourront rencontrer au cours de leur chemin. Sinon, quand on tombe, c'est difficile de se relever. Soit on devient plus pauvre, ou bien, en tout cas, c'est difficile. Voilà. Merci.
Thank you very much. I think we have to return to the panelists in order to be able to manage time very well. Let's do it the other way around now. I would ask John to respond to the questions. They may be tough, and you have the right of just skipping it and say, I have no answer. It's fine as well.
Okay. Let me do my best. Yes. So to the question of child labour in particular, this is recognised as a problem with many, many facets that we as a company and we as an industry are committed to responding to comprehensively through the International Cocoa Initiative, which has many engagements to combat child labour in the cocoa supply chain, to our own response to it, which includes the construction of more than 40 schools in Côte d'Ivoire. Access to education is one of the factors involved. Where we have instituted together with the Fair Labour Association, we don't believe that we have again all the wherewithal to answer this particular challenge. So we partner with the Fair Labour Association to come up with a child labour monitoring and remediation system that aims to detect those most at risk and act where such cases of vulnerability are found. I'll give you a very practical example. Some in that supply chain are coming into those plantations from other countries. Some don't have access to birth certificates. Without a birth certificate, you can't enroll in Ivorian school. So again, we've worked with third parties to help those young people gain access to birth certificates, which then enables them to enroll in school. Turning, if I may, just quickly onto the add-on question: Are we investing in developing opportunities for young people to earn a successful living from cocoa? I think comprehensively, yes, we are. We have something called the Nestle Cocoa Plan that we've been running for the past, I think, 10 years now, and it averages about $10 million of investment per year. Most of the income generation opportunities around cocoa are around yield and productivity per hectare. We've been developing and distributing improved planting material. We have a demonstration farm near the capital of Yamoussoukro where we train young farmers in good farming practices. And as we said, we're working to expand that with bilateral funding agencies and also with our peers as well. So the answer is very much yes, we are working very hard on that. Do we have all the answers? No, we don't, but we are working very hard on it.
Thank you very much. Jean, can you respond?
Yes, so I'll answer in English. That's fine? Okay. So I think to be an entrepreneur in Africa, you really need three things. You need perseverance, you need resilience, and you need grit. I think there's no shortcuts, right? Talking about my personal experience, you asked me if there were major investments in my venture. My first business venture, I started a company with $200, knowing that the bulk of what I needed for my business was my brain, right? I spent 10 years of my life in advertising in America, so I'm turning around and I'm saying, I want to use that same brain that wrote commercials for Nivea, that wrote commercials for Coca-Cola and all these people, to now apply it to Africa and African brands that are willing to take the journey with me. One of the major issues that I encountered was in the process of wanting to create jobs, I could not find people that could do the job. So in 2010, I started teaching at the University of Advanced School of Mass Communication. That's where I started teaching. And I started teaching with two goals. One, I need to raise and educate the next generation of talent. That's number one. Number two, it was a selfish goal, which was I need to be able to hire the talent that I need, right? So I actually delayed the creation of my company by focusing on training people out of pocket, right? Because I didn't charge the school. I was doing it for free. So training people for 3 years, right, continuously, to the point where I was able to identify, okay, this guy can be a graphic designer, this guy can be a copywriter, this guy can do well in research, this guy can do well in strategy. And that's how I built my team, right? And I hired them, and then salary really came from, and I think that's the following thing you asked was, how do you survive in a hostile environment like Cameroon? I asked myself, and I'm still asking myself that question, right? For those of you who don't understand why he's laughing, we are in a country where nepotism is at its finest, right? So you have people who are in the government, and then their son or daughter will start a company that will get the contract, right? So you as a private citizen who don't have access to that network, you do not have access to that contract. So my strategy was, because that's why I said you need to have grit and you need to be smart. My strategy was simple. I said, half of those people that have those contracts, they don't know what they're doing. Yet they have those contracts. I simply identified who they were. I sent them an email and I said, hey, I see that you just got this contract. I looked at your company, you don't have the skill set for it. I will do the job for you for 25%. You don't need to give me credit. Now, I've signed over 60 NDAs that says that over the next 30 years, I can't talk about the contract that I've been hired to work for. But trust me, most of the campaigns you see in the country, I've touched them. But this is because you get those people that get contract, but they don't know what they're doing. They have literally no clue. But the smart part for me on my end was saying, I know they have no clue. I know they don't know where to go to hire the talent because I did the legwork to train the talent. So I know where to find the talent. So let me position myself in the middle and say, hey, look, man, you don't know what you're doing. I do. You don't know where to find the people to do the work. I do. Give me a cut, I'll do it. You don't need to mention my name. And that's how I survive, and I'm still surviving to this day.
Thank you very much, Jane. I will invite Kasule to make our final submission. 2 minutes.
Yes, a very short one. For me, the gentleman who asked about coming from the village, from a young age, and for me, it's about telling an authentic story. So my mother was married off at 16 years, so she never got the value of education. And my father died when I was 8 years. But in my family, we never at any one time thought we were victims. So for me, that's the basis of my journey. Really telling the narrative, changing it to a positive. And when I talk to young girls now, and they say, oh, I'm an orphan, I tell them I was also an orphan. When I talk to women who are not educated, I tell them my mother's story. She was never educated. She took us through school. So my point is, each one of us can change the trajectory of their lives if we really focus on it. And in business, for me personally, it's the same story that we have in Uganda. When I started my branding and marketing firm, I was the only woman who had such a business. And I had to navigate to swim with the sharks without being eaten. And for me, one of the things I did is to make men my allies, of course with really strict non-negotiables, where I knew I had to hang out with them in order to get part of their work. But of course, they don't give it to you because you're a woman. You need to come when you're smart, you know your information, you know what to do. Otherwise, they will not favor you because you're a woman. So for me, it's about determination, resilience, taking risks, and being in the right place at the right time. When no one expects you to be there, you show up, and they have no choice but to involve you. And lastly, for me, which I believe strongly, is about collaboration. Because we know in Africa, there's a proverb that says, if you walk alone, you go fast. When you take others, you go far. So embrace the diversity we have, bring powerful people around you so that as you grow, they lift you up, and also as you grow, lift another woman or young person up. For me, that's the critical thing we have to think about.
Thank you very much. I thought business is about competition. Now
No.
we are talking about working together and growing
Lifting
together.
each other up.
Yeah, which is good. Professor Okome?
Okay. I think in terms of higher education and how it translates into creating jobs. You know, the people on this panel are testament. I think what education does for you is it gives you potential to transform your life in any way that you can. And for me also, you know, I kind of subscribe to the notion that education is not worthwhile if it doesn't open up your sensibilities to who you are. What is your place in the world? You know, where do you want to go with your life? And then it gives you, in a very subliminal way, it kind of prepares you to engage in that struggle, you know. So I think in terms of how I teach, I am more intentional about that with my students, to encourage them to do that probing and, you know, to deconstruct the notion, because many of my students at Brooklyn College are first generation to go to college, and a lot of them are from very poor socioeconomic backgrounds. So inspiring them to dare to succeed, because a lot of times the narratives we tell ourselves actually subvert us more than what anybody else can do to subvert you. So I think, you know, with education well done, the, you know, vista that a person has is endless. And, you know, maybe also because my parents were educators. My mother was a primary school teacher. My father was a headmaster. So I grew up with the notion that there is nothing that you cannot do. You know, you just imagine it, you focus, and you're ready to work hard. So tenacity is important. But the story you tell yourself about who you are and what you can do is very essential. So I think, well, now in terms of the practicalities of it, I'm actually very interested in building a pipeline into the professoriate. You know, I want to have more women in higher education as professors, as researchers, as scholars, you know. So I am intentional also about being there as a mentor informally and formally, you know, for women. I also am not, you know, because I am very frustrated at being away from home. You know, part of how I do the mentoring I do is using information technology, to partner with people and do collaborative work. Very time-consuming, very frustrating, but it's actually invaluable. Because if you build people up, there's nothing like it when that person makes the breakthrough. It is more rewarding than money can be. So for me, I am training people. I am also mentoring people. I also allow people to be apprentices to me, to learn what I know and, be there to support them, be their cheerleaders, advocate for them and so forth. Because I don't think, I love entrepreneurship. My son is one. He builds apps, but I think that we also need knowledge workers, people who can help us to conceptualize, to strategize in ways that really may not be financially rewarding, but it's the kind of planning that we need to do in the continent to get to the next level. So I love entrepreneurship. Some professors are also entrepreneurial. They raise a lot of money so that they can do, projects that are near and dear to their hearts. But I think my kind of entrepreneurship is building people and a pipeline into, the future for this continent.
If I can add.
Thank you very much. Jean, I'm not going to allow you because we don't have the time. Let me ask Priya whether she has something to say. If you don't, just say no.
I think I'm coming away from day one really inspired by all of the things that we've touched on, thinking about female empowerment and entrepreneurship in particular. I mean, it's really interesting. We've seen lots of data on the unemployment challenges, but we haven't seen much disaggregation by gender. So I think that that's really important. But I also think that what we've heard, different ideas about entrepreneurship mapping and the comparative advantage mapping along the lines of the Harvard model that was discussed this morning, for me, they all present like new dynamics of conceptualizing decent and green and looking for more opportunities to strategize more robustly on how to bring that about. And I think linking that back to the education question, social activism needs solid evidence. So to be really convincing at the highest levels of change making and policy making, it has to be solidly referenced. And I think this is one of the things that I found, that using like lots of community data, using practitioner level data, it's great to open up a conversation. But as soon as, for example, my work got published as an ILO paper, lots more opportunities came to speak about the work for funders who are interested. And now I'm getting lots more interest in kind of answering with different institutions, how do you bring about climate smart jobs? So I think that it is really important to invest in education, to get it into kind of higher education circles, to get kind of really solid data that's academically sound and rigorous. The other thing I wanted to sort of just end on is that it's more of a general point about the nature of investment that accompanies the job making or kind of allows job making to be strategized for. So I think where private sector companies are being given favorable conditions to invest in large scale projects that create jobs, such investments should yield benefits for the poorest and the most marginalized. So I think my end point is the fight for social justice is part of the jobs challenge, and we shouldn't see it as anything other than really central to it.
Thank you very much, Priya. I'll give the floor to, very quickly, they've been putting a lot of pressure on me that they will have something to say additionally. Rima, 1 minute. Jean, 1 minute.
In 1 minute, this is the question now to the floor. I know English is not our first language, but let's listen. I'm asking you a question. There were 3 birds on an electric wire. 2 decided to fly away. How many remained? And I'll repeat, there were 3 birds on an electric wire. 2 decided to fly away. How many remained? You give me an answer and the reason, and I'm going to give you this book. Very quickly.
Any answer on that? Very quickly, very quickly. Yes. Yes, in white, yes. The same 3.
Why? Someone else? Yes.
Disabled, please.
They all threw.
All of them flew away. Okay.
Okay. One more. They all died.
Any winner?
Okay. I'll give the book to the first to the gentleman. Yes, that's what we teach our young people, critical thinking. There were 3 birds on an electric wire. 2 decided to fly away. They all remained because they decided. So in life, we always decide and decide and decide and not do. So my message to you all, let's not decide to create jobs in Africa. Let's actually go and do the jobs.
Let him come and take his prize very quickly before we close. Please. Can we capture that?
Critical thinker.
Thank you very much. We've come to the end of this panel discussion, and I'm sure you'll agree with me that this has been a very interesting and exciting panel. What I take away from this panel is to say that opportunity matters in terms of the development of the private sector. Environment is important. The environment in which you operate is important. Institutions and incentives are extremely, extremely important. Human agency is very, very crucial. I think these are the key elements that are important to be able to create space for our young people to be good entrepreneurs and to be successful entrepreneurs. I will end this with 2 anecdotes. Let's reflect on the storyline of Mark Zuckerberg, the Facebook founder. Today, the young boy who is 35 years old is worth over $70 billion. $70 billion. He's a university dropout. He never finished his university education. Harvard later gave him an honorary degree, which he never finished in school. But today, the young boy is worth over $70 billion, estimated about 74. When he started his business around 2004, Facebook, somebody who believed in him, a private sector person in Silicon Valley, said, I'm going to help this young boy. A guy called Peter Thiel and decided to invest $500,000 in him and got about 10.2% shares in his company. See where he is today. And I often ask people, if Mark were to be an African, a university dropout, where will he be today? Where will he likely be today? He'll probably be struggling with his business if there's still a business to survive on, or you'll probably be in the motor park, trying to help them there. And that's why the incentive, the environment we create is extremely, extremely, extremely important. Both at the level of the private sector and the public sector, we need to create that environment for our young people to thrive and grow. I don't think this continent lacks innovation. I don't think our young people lack creativity. I do think that the environment is just not conducive for them to be able to thrive and fly. And we as private sector operators, we as technocrats, we as policymakers must create the environment for our young people to thrive. Secondly, as my anecdote, is that we often give a lot of incentives to the multinationals, the big businesses, tax holiday, infrastructure, and all that. What is it that we give to our small businesses? What is it that we give to young entrepreneurs in our countries? We impose tax on them. We do not create an environment for them to thrive. And that is why many of them die at infancy. Out of 10 young entrepreneurs that strive on this continent, 9 of them do not survive because the environment is not conducive for them. And the analogy for me is that we give the overfed more food to eat. The hungry and those who are starving, we take off food off their table. That's exactly what we do. And I think we need to rethink the policy environment to support young entrepreneurs on this continent. I thank you for your attention, and I hope that you've enjoyed this session. Thank you, and God bless.
Yes, thank you very much. May I invite photographers for a 1-minute quick photographs of the panel. Okay, thank you very much. A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for Director Said and his team. Thank you. Very good. Thank you very much. And a round of applause for yourselves as well. Thank you so much for your patience. And for that, we have a prize for you. Tonight, we are going to be entertained by Butera Knowles from Rwanda. She's a fantastic musician. She will be joining us. Also, Mazik Band from Egypt with their lead singer from Sudan. So they're going to do a collabo, so I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. So let's meet at 7 o'clock, starting at 7, but I can see the time we are running a little bit behind. But try to make a turnaround and head towards the entertainment center, where you will be entertained by these two singers during the welcome reception. And with that, thank you very much, and see you all tomorrow in good health. Thank you.